Marianne Williamson is on the campaign trail. And so here she is at an event in South Carolina where she had a run-in with reparations activist and friend of the show, full disclosure, Marcel Dixon, who ran as a primary challenger to James Clyburn in 2022. He plans to run again in 2024. And he went to Marianne Williamson's campaign event in South Carolina. It was one of about 7 people in the audience, it looks like, according to this footage here. But we will show you how this went down. Reparations is really his main issue. And so he started by congratulating her for running on reparations.
Right.
Then things kind of took a turn.
Yeah.
All right. So there was about 8 minutes worth of footage. We're going to play the first 4.5 because then it gets a little repetitive after that. But we can stop and start as we go. So here's Marcel Dixon with Marianne Williamson.
I want to thank you for being, and I'm going to say this because they like to say man enough. I'm going to thank you, a woman, for being man enough to do not what's popular, not what's easy, but what's right.
Yes.
And you're running on a reparations platform. And that's the right thing to do. Now, I do want to give you some pointers, if you're open to it, about your reparations plan, because I face all kinds of backlash, which I gladly accept. I'm here for it. My ancestors who were fighting in these rice marshes and swamps didn't back down to this backlash. I will be an insult to my great-grandmother who died at 101 if I back down because of people saying mean things to me. One, reparations comes from the federal government. It does not come from your tax dollars. America pays reparations every single day. They're paying it to Ukrainians right now. They're paying it when they take care of people in the country illegally and going to the trades. They paid it to the Japanese Americans who were interned. Even though my great-grandfather helped to save the Jews from the Nazis, he came back to America and he was locked out of the GI Bill, which gave trillions of dollars to mainly white veterans that they say built the middle class. And yet those same Jews right now are getting reparations. People in Wall.
Wait, I have to stop you. I am a Jew. What Jews right now are getting reparations?
The Jews who are Holocaust survivors.
That was true. What?
The Jews who are Holocaust survivors.
But they're not getting reparations from the American government.
No, they're not. What the American government did in 2014 agreed to facilitate a $12 million payback to Holocaust survivors.
That had nothing to do with the U.S. government giving money to the
U.S. government did facilitate that payback.
That facilitation is with an administrative Germany.
Okay.
Germany paid reparations.
Well,
to
so
the
my
Jewish
point is,
organization.
but
the
my
United
point,
States did not pay reparations.
but the United States government facilitated, and the point still exists. Me, a descendant of American slaves, haven't seen a penny yet. At the end of slavery, and I know you probably know these numbers, $42 to $84 trillion was the value of those of us who were enslaved. And I like the fact that you're running on reparations, but you have $1 trillion as the amount, and that is insultingly low. And I understand that you may have to make it palatable because to the American public, but if we want to do what's right, we got to do what's right. And the amount that we are owed is at $70 trillion minimum. If you just do $1 trillion, they said in the 20th century, Black Americans lost $400 billion in just land theft alone. That doesn't go to Jim Crow. That doesn't go to being left on the Homestead Act that gave white Americans $10 trillion and 300 acres. So I love the fact that we're running a reparations plan, but your plan is going to have to get those numbers right. It's going to be lineage based, and the money needs to go directly to us. Because when the Japanese Americans got their money, it didn't go to a council, it went straight to them. Those Holocaust survivors, that money goes straight to them.
That's right.
We deserve to have even more so.
Yeah, so let me say a couple of things. First of all, I honor how you stand up for your ancestors, and I stand up for mine. The United States has not paid $1 of reparations to Jews for the Holocaust. That is number one. And by the way, as far as some of the things you said about Roosevelt, which was true about his treatment of black people, he didn't do well by the Jews during the 2 years when Hitler said they could still leave. So I will not stand here while anti-Semitic tropes are repeated.
That's not anti-Semitic, that's the truth.
All right, I just have to stop this for 1 second. You know, this certainly gives credence to that Politico article, which mentioned how short a temper she has when she's challenged on something. Yeah. I mean, just look at the reaction. The thing that's really interesting is he starts off by giving her credit for putting this as, you know, part of her campaign. he rattles off a list of groups of people who he says have been paid reparations in some form, right? And then as soon as he gets to saying Holocaust survivors were paid reparations, which he later cited, all of a sudden, like, just the lack of political instinct on her part to decide to pounce on him there is just pretty amazing. We are going to finish this in a second, but go ahead.
No, and I think it was interesting, as you were saying, he was very polite, but he started off politely, and then he kind of went into the facts, and she was cool until it directed towards her, and more specifically, you know, being a Jew. Then she got upset and started going at him. But I think it's interesting that she mentioned that she started at like $1 trillion in terms of reparations for African Americans, which Marcel cited that's not nearly enough in terms of what is owed to Black people. And I've always had this issue with Marianne. I just kind of felt like, because there's a lot of people online who say, oh, we need her running because she's going to talk about issues like Medicare for all and blah, blah, blah. Fine. But this is a woman who has seemingly been known in the space to be, at least definitely in 2020, to be somewhat decent on reparations. And the fact that she's kind of lowballed the amount, which rule number one in politics, you never lowball, you always go for the highest amount possible, and then work your way down from there. That I wouldn't even call that the compromise position. That's not even like, that's like pennies essentially. So really, I just have always said this about Marianne when she announced her campaign and then she announced that, oh, I'm going to run on reparations. I just always believed personally that this is just a way to pander to the Black community. And I can't even call this a pander. Like I mentioned, like online, like she can't even pander right. You know, if you want to do it to the maximum that you can, and then work your way down from there if at all necessary. But I just believed, you know, from the start, you know, when Marianne announced, oh, I want to talk about reparations, I knew she wasn't serious. And with the back and forth she had with Marcel, she just kind of proved it here.
To your point about kind of lowballing the number, in my mind, I just don't really feel like the true damages have really been assessed. So why would you even put out a number to begin with?
Well, this goes to a point where she's obviously not prepared to talk about this issue with people who really know the ins and outs of this issue. Marcel is extraordinarily informed on this issue. He talks a mile a minute. He spits facts all the time. I mean, he never repeats himself. He never stutters, stammers. He clearly knows this inside and out, and he comes prepared. And so if you're going to front and center this issue in a campaign, you have to be prepared for conversations like this. And part of being prepared for conversations like this is being prepared to hear opinions that may offend the sensibilities of woke white liberals. Because Marcel is a guy who, I don't agree with him on all these points that he makes when it comes to the illegal immigration issue. He is extremely tough on migrants, extremely tough in a way that I think is overboard, right? But where does that come from? That comes from a place of pain. It comes from the place of a guy who feels, rightfully so, that his people are always pushed to the back of the line when it comes to giving them what the government owes them. And he's right to feel that way. Now, I don't think he's right to take that out on migrants in the way that he often does when he talks about them in that way, but it's coming from a sincere place of genuine pain. And if you are going to, as a white woman from whatever fucking, you know, LA alcove you came from, if you're going to go into South Carolina and talk this issue, you have to be prepared to hear this kind of pain. You have to be prepared to have these kinds of conversations without going off the handle the first time you become a bit uncomfortable. Like when he mentioned Holocaust survivors, right? So let's just let this finish here, and then we'll get into this more.
That's the truth. That's the truth. That's the truth. Holocaust survivors are getting reparations. That is not anti-Semitic. That's the truth. And I will continue to do so. And standing up for my ancestors means speaking the truth. Holocaust survivors did get forced insurance facilitated. That is a fact. That is a fact. I don't know what it meant. All I know that my ancestors have not gotten a penny. My ancestors
She lunges at him. I mean, this is what the article talked about. Just that short fuse. You know what I mean? Which is when you get to her, she goes off, lunges across the room.
That's all I know, and it's an insult for the American government to facilitate a facilitation of payment to Holocaust survivors while my great-grandfather is still alive and he fought to save the Jews from the Nazis.
Excuse me. It is because I'm Jewish that I feel so strongly about reparations.
And I feel strongly about reparations to my people too.
All right, that's all we got there. Like I said, it's an issue. It's a matter of preparedness. If you're going to have a conversation with someone like Marcel, who is so passionate about this issue and who comes from a place of very deep personal experience on this issue, you have to be willing to hear him out without getting so defensive at the first mention of something that makes you uncomfortable.
This is something that I've kind of mentioned before in terms of, I think, Black issues in general. It's the idea of they're not really talked about very much, I would argue. It's the idea of like reparations, especially among the African American community, is a big issue. And it's for me, especially being in this space, it's always kind of the assumption that when it's for issues like Medicare for all or like a $50 million wage, that the assumption is, if you are of color and on the left, then you should automatically be for those issues. But when it comes to issues such as this, when it comes to like reparations or like defunding the police, which are, I would argue, more primarily Black issues, we don't necessarily get the same support, especially if you're non-Black. That's how I personally feel at times when it comes to issues such as that. And I think especially with reparations, because it's such a nuanced topic, there has to be a lot more education on this, especially in terms of how, if you are walking in solidarity with us, especially in light of our issues, then you should be aware of the issues and the pain that surround the issue of reparations so that you're able to kind of support, be in solidarity, and kind of call out these issues to people who are not going to listen to us otherwise. And so for Marianne, who is running as a presidential candidate, who has said that she wants to run on this platform, she should have been more prepared, as you were saying, Keaton, in terms of the anger and vitriol that is existing within the Black community, because I think oftentimes with this issue, we have been ignored. And instead of coming, I think with the number, I think with the cost of it, I think it was a slap in the face. But then just the idea of her attacking him, and there are issues with him, but he's right on this. And the fact that she kind of lunged at him in response to that, I don't think that just shows her ill preparedness for this, but also to me, just how unserious she is in terms of really doing something in terms of dealing with this issue in a way that will make him feel, okay, you really are for us and you're going to fight for us on our behalf on this.
Exactly. Yeah, I want to take these two questions because these touch on very important points here, and so I want to touch on them. Scroofapone, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Dude talking about the Jews getting aid after surviving the Holocaust like it's a bad thing. Genuinely, what the fuck? No, he wasn't talking about it like it's a bad thing. He was citing examples of other reparations as good things and saying this is how you make the point to people. You say we've paid reparations to other groups who have been wronged in the past. Right. So he wasn't saying that Holocaust survivors shouldn't get reparations. He's using that to prove his point that his people ought to get reparations also. And to Gene's point, why is he so focused on the Jews? He wasn't focused on the Jews. He rattled off a few different groups there.
Right.
And she stopped him when he got to the Jews because she's Jewish herself. And so she got very defensive about that. But he mentioned the Japanese right before.
Right at the beginning.
And she made an issue of this. She's the one who stopped him in his track. He was in the middle of complimenting her, and he said, I'm going to give you some pointers as to how to communicate this because I've been communicating this for years. This is my main cause. And so he wasn't fixated on that. She was. And she decided to cut him off. And I just want to play one more piece of video because there was another interview with Marcel Dixon about 9 months back where he went on a show with two Jewish hosts, and he made this same point. And so I want to play this clip. You might recognize the hosts of this show, how they responded when he mentioned reparations for Holocaust survivors.
Great-grandfather is a World War II vet, still alive. The first thing he told me the U.S. military made them do when they defeated the Nazis was give back all of the land they had taken from the Jews. And Holocaust survivors get reparations. It is hypocritical and pure anti-Black racism for anyone to argue against the fact that the federal government owes Black Americans, descendants of American slaves, reparations for not just chattel slavery, for the lynch mobs, all the Black Wall streets that were burnt down. It was over 50 of them.
Look at those two guys not flying off the handle. Those two Jewish guys not flying off the handle when he mentions that. I'm Jewish myself. My grandfather was a German Jew. Now, he was fortunate enough to be born here in the U.S., so his immediate family was not persecuted by the Nazis, but not all of his family were that lucky. There's no doubt my family tree has fewer branches on it than it should have because of the Nazis, right? So I'm not like immune from taking offense to certain things. But first of all, the invocation of reparations for Holocaust survivors is not anti-Semitic. And so I would not take offense to that under normal circumstances. But in a conversation like this, where you're talking about a group of people who has been just wronged in such profound ways that are just beyond comprehension to people who have not experienced it themselves or whose family members have not experienced it themselves. When you're having a conversation with a person for whom this issue is something that they think about night and day and talk about night and day and put themselves out there to fight for night and day, you cannot be that thin-skinned.
No,
you cannot be that thin-skinned going into that conversation, and it proves what Collin said. It's just a lack of seriousness, right? There was reporting, as Russell got into when we did that Kyle thing, that her AIDS work, as much as it was great work, right? We're not knocking her for doing that work. There were people who said she got into that partly for the fame, right? Partly to score points. And it kind of seems consistent with this reparations platform. She put this on expecting to go to South Carolina and have all these Black people there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She didn't expect a real conversation from a real activist who knew what he was talking about. And that's what she got. And that's how she reacted.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I would say any single time, any single person that comes out to compliment you and support you and perhaps give you a little bit of like actual good criticism, I think you should always charge them in a fluted skirt and shoulder pads. I think that that's absolutely the way that you win people over to your side for your campaign, because that's essentially what she did. Every single time someone wants to break with her and sort of give, I mean, it's just what Marcel said. He said, I want to congratulate you. Now here are some pointers. And the second that she disagreed with him and he kind of stood up for himself and fought back, that video of her just charging across the room, you know, meanwhile lifting up all the table skirts because there weren't any people to hold them down. It kind of shows the candidate that she is and who she will be, and if she was ever to be president, exactly what you could expect.
Right. And look at the room. Look at the room. Yeah, there's no sound here because I don't want to play the video. There's fucking 9 people in this room. Look at these empty chairs. I mean, my God, like, you know, you gotta go. Look at this. Look at this. I mean, single digit turnout, basically.
Right.
I mean,
and
maybe a dozen people there.
And this is
Keaton, can you play her charging across the room again?
That is a fact. That is a fact.
Okay, here it comes.
I
Sorry,
don't
folks.
know what it meant. All I know that my ancestors have not got a penny. My ancestors have not got a
Notice
penny.
how, look, when she starts the conversation, she's standing right near him, right?
yeah,
And then when he starts giving her, constructive criticism, she walks away.
walks away.
Then she
until
screams
she
at him
gets
from
the-
across the room when he's arguing. And then when he says
gets
something
the
that
trigger
really gets
point.
her, she charges. Yeah,
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Like if you were directing that as a theater scene, it would make perfect sense.
But
Indeed.
yeah, I think this kind of proves to me, and I think this is kind of a lesson for us, I think, in independent media. I think especially with issues that are permanent to various people, races, that we definitely need to have more sensitivity and education in understanding the issues around the reparations, for example, and then what Marianne did, don't do that. But being willing to listen, being willing to accept the anger and the pain that comes behind a lot of these issues. And it's not to say you need to have an answer. And honestly, if Marianne came at this as I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but I am willing to listen to you and hear out your community and hear the Black community and hear you and what you need. And together or collaboratively, we should be able to figure out a solution of how to move forward. If she was able to do that, I would give her a little more credit than what she was doing here.
Please clap.